I don't regret growing old. I do regret growing old and fat. I'm going to say something from Poor Richard's Almanac. And I'll say the first half of it and see how many of you can chant the second half of it. Early to bed and early to rise. You all know it, and yet that was in an obscure publication that came out 250 years ago for 1 year. Why do you remember it? Well, for two reasons. First of all, because it's simple and short. Second, because it expresses a clear and accurate thought. I have not lived by it all my life. I have spent some evenings up late for reasons we won't get into. But it is correct advice. And lastly, it is memorable because it's in rhyme. People say that poetry is dead. I'm a firm believer in poetry, and I was a moderate to poor poet myself. And it works because it fits in the mind and you remember it. Stop any passing child and ask them to recite the lyrics such as they were or are of some of the popular songs. Yankee Doodle was a rather dumb song too. Let's not say that all dumb songs are modern. But ask any passing child to recite the lyrics of, say, 100 tunes, and they could do it. Because they remember it. Why they remember it? Because it's put in a way that goes into the mind. It used to be that there was high turnover in the Congress of the United States. Up until about the 1920s, the normal turnover in Congress was 20 to 30% a year. People who simply decided, I'm going to go home. I've done as much as I care to do. I call them voluntary quits. But in the 20s, and especially in the 30s, you got a professional class of politicians. They decided that they'll get my voting card away from me when they unwrap my cold dead fingers from around it. And there was even 1 year where the number of congressmen defeated in an election was 7, and the number who shuffled off this mortal coil because they died was also 7. And if you have to wait for the congressman to die or be sent to jail, there's that possibility too. In order to get them out of office and elect someone new, you tend to get fossilized thinking in the government. John Adams wrote that the members of Congress should regularly, we believe in rotation in office, regularly go home and live among the people and swim in the common sea, nice phrase from old John, and live under the laws we wrote. You notice that the present Congress has a tendency to exempt themselves and their offices from any law they're imposing on everyone else that they consider would interfere with their congressional noblesse oblige. And what does that make them into except courtiers like those in the courts, where I spent as a diplomat in England for 10 years, and in France for 5. Now, you came here to talk about the Constitution, so let's do that. Any questions on any aspect of the Constitution? And if it is within the reach of my cable tow, because I am a Mason, I will answer them. Your questions? Yes, sir.
It seems to me that, try to put this in a question form, that the Constitution also recognized the fallen nature of man.
Of course it did.
And that is one of the, that's the most important point in this whole document of ours, which makes it very, very unique, because it was prepared by, may I say the word, Christians for the most part, who understood the fallen nature of man.
Well, let me stop you for a second. Yeah. We were not theologians. We were there for a secular purpose. And I have called the Constitution our secular religion. And it had to be so, because we were well aware of the different religious sects and of the interest that some of them had in slaughtering the members of the others, which had been proved for centuries in Europe. So we did not want that. So you are right in one sense, that because man is capable of evil, of theft and greed, burglary and assault, and of bad things in office, stealing the prerogatives of office, or stealing the money that goes there. Because all of these things are possible, we had to write a constitution which would place restraints on individuals in the government and outside the government. Why? Because man is capable, well, we don't call it sin. You don't go to jail for sin. There are other punishments for that. Now, by the way, I worked one time on an article. I wanted to try to find if there was such a thing as a universal religion, to go into the heart of all the world's major religions and say, what do they have in common? That's one of the investigative projects that I abandoned, because I concluded that there were not enough concepts in common between the world's great religions to do that. And that underscored the point of why the government of the United States was not to establish a church. Now, establishment of religion means an official religion. It does not mean preventing people, because the other part of the First Amendment says not to forbid the free exercise of religion. It is not supposed to shut down people's individual religion. It's supposed to make sure that no particular church with no particular creed is an official church in the United States. So you're right in one sense, but you're wrong in another.
It was a Christian culture, if you will. There was, I realize there was no attempt to establish a quote Christian church per se, but the men who were there basically came from a Christian culture as compared to the Enlightenment that was running alongside of this group.
Most did, but notably some did not. Remember that when Jefferson ran for president, first and second time, he was accused of being impious. Because when you get heavily into Jefferson's writings, and the man wrote a tremendous amount. I think his collected works are about 20 volumes. In a private conversation, I had more than a few with a red-haired genius from Commonwealth of Virginia. Fascinating man. He would acknowledge that he tended to be a deist, which means I believe that there is a God, and I believe that God created the world, but beyond that, my beliefs are not specific. Thomas Paine did the same thing. As a matter of fact, all of his friends and supporters from when he wrote the words that created the United States of America, in that he professed to be, and I think was at the time, a Christian. But when he wrote his analysis of religion, he condemned all religions. But he said, I do believe in God, because when you look at his universe, with its complexity, there must be that. Let me tell you another thing he did. Some of us could look